All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Million Dollar Relationships. And today I am here with my new friend, Scott Anderson. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Yeah. And, this is so cool how this relationship between you and I started. We got connected through our mutual friend, Josh, who Josh knew that I was doing this podcast. And he reached out to me and he's like, Kevin, he said, I know this guy, Scott, he would make a great person to interview for your podcast. And so you and I ended up connecting on the back of that, and with Josh's help, we had an initial conversation where you and I, we just totally hit it off. And even though we didn't personally know each other before that initial conversation, because we had a mutual friend in Josh, that's what I love about relationships is when we have that mutual connection, that mutual trust in somebody, that they kind of get to be that conduit of trust for us. And then when you and I connected for that first conversation, we just kind of had a conversation and got to know each other, and it was really awesome. And as a result of that, I'm like, absolutely, Scott, if you're up for it, I would love to interview you for the podcast. And
I'm glad to be here. Yeah. Josh Tapp is a great guy and a really great connector. Yeah. But I think that I've been on his podcast a couple of times, but we've come to be friends. And one of the things that he's really a genius at is, I think, among other things, he's quite the entrepreneur, but one of them is to really help me understand the value of podcasts and help podcasters really turn what is already a very rewarding experience into a tremendous asset. But yeah, you're exactly right. There's nothing more valuable to me than relationships and new relationships, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, let's start by having you share a little bit about what you do, Scott, who you serve, what motivates you to do what you do, and just kind of set a little bit of context for everybody here.
Sure, you bet. Well, as I usually say, I'm a serial entrepreneur and have the scars to prove it. I've launched 9 companies and sold 6, including a not-for-profit organization. And as a result of as part of this whole journey, I've also become an executive coach, which is what I principally do now. And in starting my nonprofit organization is called At Ease USA, which is a post-traumatic stress disorder treatment technology accelerator. We do this in partnership with our colleagues at Tel Aviv University in Israel and the Israeli government. Anyway, as part of getting into that whole venture, I went back to school and got a graduate degree in clinical counseling to kind of have a sense of what I was doing. So I mainly coach entrepreneurs and their teams, and lately, in particular, coach executives that are going through burnout to help them recover from burnout.
Very good. And so I'm curious, with all that's gone on over the last 2.5 years here with the pandemic and stuff, has that become a much bigger issue and concern for entrepreneurs, Scott?
I find it has been, although, really when I kind of trace back not only my clients' burnout, but also my own, which is really what brought me to focus on burnout in the first place. I really, after selling probably the largest business that I launched, after selling that, part of the reason I sold it was because I was in such a bad burnout. What a lot of people say is that the feeling that COVID in 2020 really brought on burnout. But my experience personally and with my clients is that it was really, for most people, it had been going on for several years prior to COVID, but that COVID really was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people. not just the isolation and the pandemic, but the economic collapse that followed, and all the rest of it. But for most people, I found that it goes back as far as, depending on how old you are, it goes back to 2008, goes back to the Great Recession.
Sure, sure. So, and it's interesting how many of us as entrepreneurs have taken the challenges, that we've dealt with in our own life, in our own businesses. And, sometimes well, in fact, most of the time, the biggest lessons come from the most expensive and painful experiences.
No doubt about it. Yeah, no question. That's why I say that what I know about entrepreneurship is a result of scar tissue research, for sure.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite entrepreneurs is a guy named Russ Ruffino, and he says something I think it's so wise and so true. He says that basically, as entrepreneurs, what we're signing up for is problem solving. And yet, when problems occur, at least early in your entrepreneurial career, you could be surprised by how many problems there are, and how really it's just an unending series of problem solving. And he said it's very much like somebody who wants to be a professional prize fighter, and gets in the ring and gets punched in the nose and says, "Hey, that guy hit me." But he said, I just love that metaphor. But as Russ says, yeah, you can expect to get punched in the nose a lot.
Yep.
As an entrepreneur, and that's what it's all about. And the faster you accept it, the better off you'll be.
That's right. And of course, I couldn't help but think of that saying from Mike Tyson. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Exactly.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Said well by that philosopher, Mike Tyson, but that's very, very true. No question about it.
Yeah. So do you mind sharing, Scott, a little bit about what was going on in your life and what transpired there that just really led you to doing the work that you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are really two contributing factors to it. Part of it is I've been involved in lots of research into post-traumatic stress disorder, not only for military families, but also for women recovering from sexual assault and domestic violence, and children recovering from domestic violence and child abuse, and also sexual assault. And in my study of that, one of the things that I noticed is that there are some symptoms and also some evidence-based practices that strangely or to me it was strange, have some application to burnout. So I'd spent years and years studying PTSD, and then in the last couple of years of owning the advertising agency that I own, I started to experience some of the same kinds of symptoms. One of them was, and I didn't realize it was burnout until much later, but the symptoms that most people experience, and the symptoms that are defined by the World Health Organization as they consider or categorize burnout as a formal disorder. But the number one experience is a feeling of physical, mental, and sort of psychological exhaustion, that no matter how much sleep you get, you're still exhausted. I find this with a lot of my clients, and they'll say that they wake up in the morning after a good night's sleep, but they're still tired. And ultimately, if it goes far enough, reach the point where they're sitting on the edge of the bed one day wondering, boy, I hope I can go to work today. I'm not sure I can, because I just don't have the energy to do it. And right on the heels of that, another of the most common symptoms, which I experienced, is a strange feeling of disconnection from a business that I created, that was my baby. I started to feel increasingly disconnected from the business that we were in, my employees, my partners, my customers even. I started to feel more and more sort of disconnected. It was a very strange feeling that I had never really had before. And yet it turns out to be very well researched and described in the literature about workplace burnout. And then the last symptom that I really experienced that was again caught me by surprise was an increase, not just a feeling of disconnection from the people that I was engaged with, from the key relationships, back to our original point, but I started to feel almost resentful, or truly resentful, towards coworkers and towards even customers. And I mean, this is a complete 180 for somebody like me, who as an entrepreneur was super passionate about all of that, and found myself being kind of confused by feeling not just disconnected from it, but almost resentful or bitter towards these things. And anyway, when I was going through this, I had no idea what it was, because it's related to depression, maybe related to anxiety, but it's really neither one. And so I went to my own therapist friends, my colleagues in the clinical counseling world, and tried to get some help there, and really wasn't finding what I was looking for. And ultimately did just a ton of research into the research of burnout,
Okay.
and stumbled into some concepts which thankfully really helped me.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I gotta imagine that this has, it hasn't, with everything going on in the world, it's not getting easier for entrepreneurs necessarily. It's getting more challenging and more challenging to navigate for sure. And is this a cyclical thing that you've found here? Is that entrepreneurs they might start one business and then get burnt out on that, and then realize they need to make a pivot, and it's going to happen again at some point?
Well, I think it's certainly true that there's a cycle with most entrepreneurs, that entrepreneurs really thrive on the challenge and the nuance of starting something from scratch, and become bored and restless when things plateau, or when it's not as exciting as it once was. And that may be kind of related to burnout, but burnout is really, I think, something kind of different. There's no question that entrepreneurs like me anyway have a very short attention span, and so it's difficult to for something to be as exciting. And in fact, sometimes as an entrepreneur, my attempt to make my business more exciting did not help the business.
Yeah,
It may have been more exciting, but it didn't help our my employees or our customers even.
yeah.
So I think there's an aspect definitely to that, but bona fide burnout is a little bit different. Though there's certainly, there's a cycle to entrepreneur interest in the business.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, Scott, I really appreciate you sharing all that. And so what I want to do now is we're gonna switch gears just a little bit here.
Good.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. And here we go. Have you ever been introduced to a person that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person? And Scott, I'm just really excited to hear your story, your experience around this, as well as be able to give you an opportunity to just really honor somebody who's had such a profound impact on your life and on your business.
Well, I appreciate, it's a great question, first of all. And I've been fortunate to meet some really wonderful people. A couple of people come to mind.
Okay.
One of them is my partner in the At Ease USA initiative, a psychologist at Tel Aviv University named Yair Barhem, who is prior to becoming a psychologist, he was the head of the Israeli Commandos, which is essentially a cross between, SEALs and Delta Force, that kind of thing. So think about the folks that conducted the raid on Entebbe. So he was not just an Israeli commando, which in itself is the most elite military force in Israel, but also was the head of the commandos.
Wow.
And he's a very, very interesting guy, and I learned a ton from him, not only about post-traumatic stress disorder, basically he had a fantastic career in the Israeli military, but came out of it with PTSD himself. And in Israel, a lot of your career depends on, or is a reflection of your military success. And he had had a very illustrious military career. And when you're out of the military, you kind of get the Israeli gold card if you've had the kind of career that Yair did.
Okay.
And so he and a number of his colleagues, his leadership team, all wanted to go back to school. They all got PhDs in psychology and started to research post-traumatic stress disorder. And Dr. Barham and his team are the world leaders now in post-traumatic stress disorder. The thing that I loved about, I mean, Yair is just like a lot of Israelis, is just so full of life and passion. But the thing that I really love about him, and it really affected not just my involvement with PTSD, but also with my career in general, was him making this pivot from a very strong military career to really a life of public service. And in fact, they're now building a giant research center, PTSD research center in Tel Aviv that Dr. Barham is running. So he's had, two gigantic careers, but he's pretty well regarded as the international leader in post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
But it all came out of his own PTSD and the PTSD of his colleagues and lots of other members of the Israeli military family.
Very good. Very good. Wow. So, and you mentioned there was somebody else that you wanted to honor as well.
Yeah, boy, I mean, and a couple of people come to mind, but one of the people that comes to mind today, anyway, is a guy who was just essential in my own, for me as a young man, as I was sort of beginning my military, or excuse me, my entrepreneurial career, not my military career, and he became my mentor, and my father died when I was pretty young and became kind of a father figure as well, and was just instrumental in helping me become an entrepreneur, having confidence in me, but also really challenging me. And I met him when I was about 25, and one of the conversations I remember with him was that I was, in those days, I was pissed off and unhappy a lot. And he asked me one day, Scott, when are you going to be happy? And no one had ever asked me that question before.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, well, as any fool can see, I'll be happy when my ship comes in, when my punch list is exactly the way I wanted it to be. As a 25-year-old, I thought there are some things that aren't quite right. And as soon as they're right, then I'll be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, really, I mean, are you going to be, 2 weeks from now or a month, or when are you going to be happy? And, it's probably obvious to everybody else, but to me, this was a brand new idea that I could change that I had to change my attitude, and that I could change my attitude.
Yeah.
And, I mean, today it's something that I take kind of for granted, but in those days, it was a life-changing, life-saving lesson. And I received many, many as a result of Click Weston. He's just a wonderful guy.
And what was his name, did you say?
His name was Click, C-L-I-C-K, Weston. And just a wonderful man. And he was the mentor to lots and lots of young guys, and both from a business perspective as well as a personal development and spiritual standpoint.
Yeah. It's very interesting because this concept of, I mean, him asking you, okay, Scott, when are you going to be happy? I mean, what a powerful question. What a powerful even thought to just have.
Yeah.
Because so many of us think, when I do this, when I achieve this, when I reach this goal, then I'll really be happy. And,
Exactly.
and the notion and the idea and the realization that, you know what, we can be happy right now,
Right now,
enjoy the
exactly.
journey. And,
Exactly.
you
And
know,
this is a big part of burnout. I found with a lot of driven executives and entrepreneurs, and I've certainly been this way, is that when sales get to X, or when whatever, sort of abstract and arbitrary measurement that I've created, then I'll be happy. And as long as happiness is entirely an outside thing, then it's never going to be. We may never get it, or if we get it, it'll only be momentary.
that's right.
And one of the biggest lessons in recovery from burnout, and again, entrepreneurs tend to be very goal-oriented and perfectionistic, and those two things do not add up to happiness. Nothing's perfect, and whatever numbers you attain, they aren't going to last.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of bringing happiness as turning it into an inside job versus an outside job is one of the key recovery ideas from burnout.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that totally makes sense. Well, Scott, I really appreciate you sharing this. And, for anybody listening to this, going, man, Kev, I really like Scott. I love the way he shows up. How can they get more information on what you're doing? How can they follow up if they wanted to with you?
Thanks, Kevin. The easiest way is to go to burnoutbreakthrough.com.
Okay.
And we have a masterclass training on the 5 shifts, evidence-based skills and approaches that we found are most effective with recovery from burnout. So check it out, burnoutbreakthrough.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking
My
the time.
pleasure. Thank you.
You bet. Bye for now, everybody.